A gal felt like something was off with the world, so she went ahead and wiped out millions of folks to get back to reality.
No! Computer!
At the start of the episode, Joan Tate wakes up and gets herself together, while her fiancé, Chris, fixes her breakfast. As she sits down at the table, she gets a message but quickly hides her phone from Chris. After breakfast, Joan leaves the house, hops into her car, and notices her friend Mike running by. She heads to work at Sonical, a tech company where she holds the position of technical director, all while lip-syncing to Saweetie's rap song On the Way. Joan arrives at the office, and soon her assistant, Eric, pops in, reminding her that Sandy, one of the colleagues, is already waiting for her.
Oh, God. I know.
Nervous Joan gathers herself and suddenly gets a message from her ex-boyfriend, Mac, who wants to meet up, but she doesn't respond. Finally, Joan meets with Sandy and informs her that she has to let her go because her work on decreasing the company's carbon emissions didn't impress the board of directors. The shaken girl tries to prove the value and necessity of her work, but Joan can't help her in any way. Sandy asks for a second chance, mentioning that she just put a down payment on a new apartment, but Joan awkwardly stays silent.
Joan, please don't do this.
However, Joan notices again how sorry she is and leaves the office, allowing security to escort Sandy out. Then Joan grabs an e-cigarette and goes outside to contemplate Mac's message. Suddenly, she drops the cigarette, and it falls right onto Sandy, who is leaving the building with her things. Joan panics, hiding, not wanting to talk to her ex-colleague again, but Sandy still notices her.
You're a coward, Joan!
Later that same day, Joan visits her therapist and opens up about her role in the company. She's troubled that she's just a middleman between the real leadership and the subordinates, making her opinion meaningless. The conversation shifts to her personal life, and Joan admits that despite Chris being smart, kind, and caring, he seems ordinary to her. Even the food he cooks tastes bland, but she has to pretend everything is great. Additionally, she can't forget Mac, with whom the relationship was more challenging but exciting. Now feeling tangled up, Joan feels like she's living on autopilot and not the hero of her own life. The therapist wonders if Joan wants to change that. After a few seconds of contemplation, Joan nods hesitantly. After therapy, Joan notices new messages from Mac, saying he's in town for only 3 days. Finally, she gathers the courage to respond to the persistent guy. In the evening, they meet at a bar, and Mac compliments Joan on her new hairstyle. He tries to touch her, but she stops his hand. Surprised by her behavior, Mac mockingly asks about her relationship with Chris. Annoyed, Joan reminds him that she and Mac tried for 2 years to build a normal relationship, and now she's getting married to Chris. She's angry that Mac broke her heart back in the day, and now that things are going well for her, he shows up.
Like an unflushed turd.
Joan declares that she can't trust him anymore, but Mac confesses that he wants to rekindle their relationship and suggests running away to San Jose. The bewildered girl responds that she can't leave Chris, but then their faces draw close, and they kiss. But soon, Joan comes to her senses, pulls away, and panics, leaving the bar in a hurry. However, Mac manages to remind her that he's staying in the same hotel as always. An agitated Joan returns home. Chris kisses her and notices that she had a drink, but she explains it was a farewell party at work. Chris treats her to a new dish, and she's once again forced to pretend she enjoyed it. Settling on the couch, they launch the streaming service Streamberry to choose a series for the night. Soon, they stumble upon a show called Joan is Awful starring Salma Hayek. They notice that the character on the poster suspiciously resembles the real Joan. She refuses to watch the series, but intrigued Chris insists, and she reluctantly agrees. From the first minutes, Joan realizes that the series is replaying all the events of her day. In complete confusion, she accuses Chris of being behind it, but he swears he's innocent. Joan starts having a panic attack. She feels like the creators want to portray her as a monster, but Chris tries to calm her down.
This is bad. This is
Okay, alright.
fucking insane.
Alright.
Meanwhile, all of Joan's friends and acquaintances are also watching the series and emotionally discussing what's happening with their partners. Shocked, Joan learns that even her parents are watching this compromising show. Meanwhile, Chris sees on the screen Joan reading messages from Mac and can't believe his eyes. Joan starts denying everything, but then the series reaches the moment of the therapy session. Hoping to hide the truth, Joan suggests stopping the viewing, but Chris takes away the remote. She jumps off the couch and tries to turn off the TV, but Chris hears everything she said to the therapist about him and her crazy relationship with Mac. Shocked by her betrayal, Chris stands up and starts packing. Joan insists that none of this happened in reality, but Chris doesn't believe her. As he heads to the exit, passing through the living room, he sees the scene where Mac and Joan are kissing in the bar. Then the characters in the series also choose a movie for the night and come across the show Joan is Awful, but in it, Cate Blanchett plays the role of Joan. The real Joan rushes out of the house after Chris, trying to prove her innocence. Chris asks her to show her phone to check if there's any conversation with Mac. Joan hesitates to answer, then says her phone is inside, and Chris leaves. Joan returns home and sees that everything that happened a few minutes ago is already being played out in the series. Then Mac calls her, and Joan loses it. The next morning, Joan heads back to work, and Mike, instead of the usual greeting, condemns her. She arrives at the office, and Eric informs her that the committee is firing her for violating the non-disclosure agreement in the scene with Sandy's dismissal. Joan protests, claiming she did nothing wrong, but soon realizes she has no choice. Gathering her belongings, the subdued girl exits the building and suddenly decides to glance at the second floor. All her former colleagues avoid her, just like she avoided Sandy, and only Eric bids her a restrained farewell. Joan returns home, pours herself a drink, and continues watching the series about her life. She grabs a newspaper and sees an article about Streamberry CEO Mona Havadi praising the show Joan is awful. After some time, she goes to her lawyer to discuss a plan of action. However, the lawyer asserts that legally Streamberry has the right to use Joan's life for content creation since she accepted all the terms of service when registering. Stunned, Joan decides to sue Salma Hayek, but the lawyer explains that it's impossible. The series uses only a digital representation of the actress, meaning no one is filming her. The show is just computer-generated images created by an advanced quantum computer and real-time data gathered from Joan's devices. So the lawyer explains that she is being watched through her phone. Suddenly, the idea of suing Streamberry for defamation crosses her mind, as they portray her in a worse light than she really is, but even this turns out to be impossible.
I agree.
Meanwhile, Mac is already watching the new episode of Joan is Awful, and suddenly a disappointed Joan arrives at his place. He starts consoling the distraught girl, and soon they find themselves in bed. However, Mac can't focus, knowing that all of this will be shown in the show. Joan leaves the bedroom and decides to watch the new episode. During the scene of her conversation with the lawyer, a crazy plan is born in her mind. The next day, Joan binges on hamburgers and takes a laxative. Dressed in a cheerleader costume, she bursts into a church and disrupts a wedding, relieving herself right in the middle of the hall.
Salma Hayek's gonna fucking hate this.
And indeed, soon the enraged Salma Hayek goes to her lawyer and demands to sue Streamberry for outrageous deepfakes. However, he also can't do anything, as Salma signed an agreement to use her image. The outraged actress fires her lawyer and goes to Joan. Joan apologizes for her stunt in the church and explains that she wanted to draw Hayek's attention to the situation. However, the actress informs her that she is also powerless against Streamberry, and shutting down the series is impossible. Joan and Salma realize they've both been deceived and decide to break into the building where the quantum computer is located to destroy it and stop the creation of the series. Salma goes to Streamberry's main office and announces that she has a meeting with the CEO Mona Havadi. While the administrator clarifies the details, the actress asks to be led to a separate restroom. Then she finds a back entrance and lets Joan in through it. The girls sneak into Mona Havadi's office while she is giving an interview about new forms of entertainment created by Streamberry. The CEO introduces the innovative Quamputer, capable of endlessly generating content and creating multiple multiverses. Mona Havadi reveals that shooting, processing, and editing material takes only minutes, unlike working on a regular show. The journalist asks why Joan was chosen for the series, and Mona replies that they needed an ordinary boring person to test the system. She also announces that soon there will be personalized content for each registered user, of which there are already about 800 million.
System, the most relatable content imaginable.
The astonished journalist asks why the word awful is used in the titles of all the projects. The director states that more life-affirming content doesn't interest the audience. The company found that focusing on the weaknesses of the characters immerses the viewer in a state of hypnotic horror and is much more effective in engaging them in what's happening on the screen. After overhearing the entire conversation, Joan and Salma finally head to the Quamputer. Meanwhile, Streamberry employees search the building for the actress. The girls break into the room where the Quamputer is located, startling the technician Beppy, who is about to have a snack. He plans to call security, but Salma threatens to break his arm if he does. Suddenly, Joan notices her image on the screens in the Joan is Awful series. She is confused because Hayek should be in her place. Beppy explains that this is the version of the series that the primary Joan is watching. Joan doesn't understand how this could happen, and Beppy reveals that she is a version of Joan played by the digital image of actress Annie Murphy. When the primary Joan in the real world watches Joan is Awful, she sees Annie Murphy instead of herself. It turns out they are currently on the first fictional level of Joan's life adaptation.
You're in a show right now.
I'm in a show right now?
Thus, Annie Murphy granted the rights to use her image for Joan on the first level, and Salma Hayek, on the second level, where she also plays herself. Hayek objects, as she is not playing herself, she is real, but Sarah claims that it only seems so to her because they are currently in a simulated reality. The girls don't understand what Beppy is talking about, and Joan knocks him out to finally shut him up. Then Joan takes an axe and heads towards the Quamputer. However, when she reaches the machine, she starts hesitating and tries to grasp what is real and what is not. Suddenly, Mona Havati bursts into the room and warns that if she smashes the computer, she will destroy millions of people from the next levels who consider themselves real. She also declares that the reality they are currently in will disappear. Salma then tries to stop Joan, as she wants to preserve her own life. But Joan realizes that the decision to smash the computer is actually made not by her, but by the primary Joan, meaning she cannot prevent the inevitable. Joan smashes the computer, and all the characters and realities it created disappear. The primary Joan takes the place of Joan, and Annie Murphy takes the place of Salma Hayek, and then they get arrested. Some time later, in the real world, Joan visits her therapist and tells her that her life is getting back on track, and she is in a relationship again. Joan has also opened her own coffee shop and now treats her employees well. Finally, Joan feels like the main character of her life. The therapist asks how the house arrest is affecting her life, but Joan claims that she is handling all the difficulties. Then Joan goes to work, where she meets Annie Murphy, with whom they are now friends, and who is also under house arrest due to the incident at Streamberry. And how do you feel about the development of artificial intelligence capable of disrupting human life? And what would you do if you found out that your life was being turned into a TV series? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit a like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.